Oh, hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today, where we're going to take a look at Lesson 6 with the OSU PDC Pro for the spring of 2022. And I think what we'll do is just jump right into taking a look at lesson number 6 here. So I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. Cool. So after last lesson's tough assignment, which lesson 5 is pretty intense, we're looking at lesson 6, which is a little bit of a breather for this this session. So obviously in lesson 6, we're taking a look at soils. And we want you to basically map the soils for your project site. And then we're going to do some actual on the ground testing and sort of compare those as well as doing a bit of a summary. So if we are on lesson 6 discussion board here, you can see those 3 items that we're looking for. And for everybody in the US, you have a fantastic resource, probably one of the finest resources globally for soil mapping. And you can access that through this link here, the Web Soil Survey. And there is a little bit of a process with some instructions here. So I would definitely go through that. Because you have to define your area of interest, or the map just won't know where to go. And again, there's a nice tutorial right below it here if you do run into any challenges at all. So this is, again, an excellent resource for those outside of the US. I don't think we have any Canadian students in this go around in this group. But there are other resources up in British Columbia, Canada, where I am. You know, there's a fantastic resource as well. So it's very, very similar, just set up a little bit differently. But again, this is a great resource to go through, and you're going to want to include the descriptions that are listed here. And basically, it's just a screenshot of the report and the web soil map that you're going to include in your assignment. So it's quite easy that way. And it's very interesting. So what you probably will find is those that are in urban settings, you may or may not kind of match up with the mapping results. And, you know, for obvious reasons, urban locations are, you know, highly disturbed sites, right? Between, you know, roads and sidewalks and all the infrastructure and the actual building footprint, there's just a huge amount of disruption. So keep your eye open for that if you're in an urban setting. The other thing to look out for, sorry, no, I don't think there is actually anything to look out for. It's mainly the urban areas that are a little bit tricky. That covers the mapping part. So in this portion, again, you're going to be taking screenshots and data. So the next part, which is fun, is doing a soil test on your project site. So you definitely want to have access to that. And it's very, very simple. It's basically a jar test. There's instructional videos here and a little bit about the soil texture pyramid or triangle and how to use that. It's quite simple. The tricky part with the jar test is actually getting an image of that you can recognize. You can see the different layers on. So you may have to play with lighting a little bit, right? So it is, if you can do it, if you can get a good picture that distinctly shows the sand, silt, clay layers. That's super helpful for me when I'm grading it. Otherwise, we just have to guess at my end a little bit. So that is something to look for. Again, after the jar test, we want to actually do a percolation test. And this is a very interesting test to go through. It's basically a 1 foot deep hole, and you're going to fill it with water and time. Take a look at the amount of time it takes to drain, or the amount of time it takes to go down 1 inch or 2. If you're in really heavy soils, it may not empty very quickly, so you might have to just see how much time it takes to go down 1 inch. If you're in any sort of conditions like I am, I'm in kind of a sandy loam here. If I fill up a hole and fill it, it's probably empty in 5 minutes. So those are really valuable bits of information to know about as you go forward with trying to improve your soils. So if you know you have fast draining soils, you're pretty much guaranteed that you're going to have to be regularly amending these in order to boost your water holding capacity. So that's funny enough, whether you have sand, whether you lean heavy on the sand or on the clay end, the strategies that we go forward with in terms of amending are very, very similar. So organic matter is basically our friend, and that is what we want to introduce. But we can get into that a little bit later. Yeah, so this is interesting too, because we are looking at sand, silt, clay. So we are looking at soil texture. And that is one big part of soils. The other is soil biology, and we really don't get into that with this course, but it is something that you might want to dive into yourself. And if you do want to take a look at something like that, I would, whoops, I'll just bring up a page here for you if I can type. Dr. Elaine Ingham is a well-known soil scientist, and let me just see, there we go. She has a course that she offers on the soil food web. I'm not promoting her course. I have taken it, and it is fantastic for those who really want to get into soils. And it is, is quite amazing, the work that she has done over the past 40 years. If we go back here. Sorry, I'm having trouble seeing my screen. I don't know why this, there we go. So one of the things that she is well known for is developing the whole concept of the soil food web. Wow. And this is what that's all about. It's basically much like our food web, but this is below ground, and all, basically how it starts with microorganisms, and they go up the chain and they get larger and larger, and how important it is to have all of these elements within your soils. So again, that's not part of the course. This is really a course all unto its own. But because we're looking at soils, I think it's really helpful for everybody to just realize that the sand, silt, clay, as important as it is, there is this other component to it. All right, try and get that out of my road here. Yeah, so this testing is super easy. It's super easy to do. What you might find is if you took a soil sample today and you were in an area that had a lot of clay, your jar may be cloudy for days and days and days, and don't be too concerned about that. It'll take a little bit of time for those clay particles to settle out. And if you're in a more sandy loam or sandy situation, you'll probably find everything settles out quite quickly. So again, the photo for that is the tricky part. And then the third part of the assignment is really just this narrative describing how your samples compare with the soil maps. And they may match up and they may not. Often I find in urban settings, you're going to have probably a higher sand content. And that's sort of typical with some of the infill that occurs in urban settings when they bring materials in. It's, can be gravelly, sandy. We're also looking at what local materials you have available to build soil. And really that is, in my experience, this is an ongoing process. So every year you want to be adding something to your soils, especially if you're growing annual vegetables. If it's a perennial planting, the same thing. You want to cover the soil. You want to make sure it's not being exposed to direct sunlight and has adequate vegetation there. So cover cropping can do that on a larger scale or even smaller. And yeah, some of the limiting factors. So where I live, the limiting factor would be it's extremely sharp drainage. So I really appreciate that in December, and I appreciate it less in July because we've got to, pump more water. But to offset that, again, we want to build our soil. And believe it or not, just going back to Elaine Ingham, I know when I was taking her program, she showed an example of her work where they took an area, I can't remember the exact project name, but basically they were dealing with pure sand. And they amended that with as high quality compost as they could, and they got it to behave like loam. So it wasn't loam, but it behaved like loam. And that's what, that really stuck with me. And that's something that I try and do with all of our work. And I would encourage you to also take a look at that. So other things we want to look at is what's nitrogen rich, what's carbon rich, because of course those are the building blocks of our compost. And that is a whole other course in itself, building and maintaining compost. But for those who want to compost, the most simple manner is really what's called a passive pile, an unmanaged compost pile. And that's one that doesn't generate any heat that you have to manage. If you do thermophilic composting, which is where you bring the temperature up to 165 degrees, ideally on 3 different occasions, that requires quite a bit of management, daily or multiple times a day. So both yield a good result, but one is much more, one is much slower than the other. The passive composting takes a lot more time. Yeah, and there's a couple of really interesting videos out there on those 17-day Berkeley compost method. You should consider Googling that. That's very interesting. I've done that one before. So let's see here. Then we have a few other things we're asking you for with the analysis. So this is pretty straightforward. We have some resources listed here. And here's what the soil, it's basically a soil map system in British Columbia, Canada, which is great. But the US one is here. And again, tutorials on how to use it, because for some it might be a little bit tricky, and you definitely want to include the map in your assignment. And then we have our rubric here. So you can see that, the mapping's worth up to 4 points, and then the testing is important, and the analysis as well. And then, of course, going through your SWOT analysis. So maybe what we'll do, I've got a couple of examples I can show you here. There we go. So yeah, if you go, when you log into the OSU site and you go to the modules section here, your screen might look slightly different, but if you go under resources and the sample reports, you can see some examples that students have done. And that's a great place to take a look at if you have any questions about how something might aesthetically look and what the content is. So this student here, Brian Kittle, he put together the soil map, and it's basically, again, just a screenshot from that USDA site. So this is pretty straightforward. It includes these abbreviations, and those get explained on the following pages. And really what we're after here is seeing what's going on. So he's got a silty loam within the main part of his site, and then he's got a little bit of PM here, which is more of a silty clay loam. So that's very interesting to see. And you might find that even on urban sites, it might have multiple soil types listed. So don't be surprised if you see that. And this is an example of where this person took 3 different samples and a little explanation as to why, and the microclimate and what's growing there in a picture. It's a really nice way to package it up. There's a lot of information on that one page. And then these are the individual test holes. So you can see that's a very nice picture of the jar, and you can see that top little layer of clay, and then a bit of silt, and then quite a bit of sand here. And then, excuse me, a lot of pollen in my area today. You can see in the soil triangle, person has indicated where that sits. So he's in a sandy loam, and a little bit about the test as well as the ribbon test, percolation test. And now let's see, percolation was 304.8 mil per hour. That's rapid draining. And then the hole itself. So if you put your sheet together basically with this concept in mind, you're off to the races here. So again, a lot of info on this one page. And there's test number 2 and test number 3. So again, this is a really helpful basic test. It doesn't tell you really that much about the fertility, but this is really a good first step in getting to know your soils. And we could even sort of trace back to last lesson, where we were looking at water, and with some of your water plans, or really the beginning of that, some of you may be considering some rain gardens. And in order for those to be successful, you would want to know the soil types. If you had a heavy clay soil and you built a rain garden, it would turn into a pond, which is not what you want if you're building a rain garden. So you definitely want to ensure you've got good infiltration. And we were on a project, we're still there trying to get finished up, but we built a rain garden recently and we had nice sandy loam the whole way. In the last couple of inches of our excavation, we hit a layer of clay. So we were able to work around it by putting in a little bottom drain on it, which seems a little bit counter to what you're trying to do. But during the winter months, we get 1,100 millimeters of rain, which is quite a bit. And we want to make sure that that water has a place to go. We're not really that interested in infiltrating in November, December, January. So the water will have a place to go. We can turn that drain off. We have a valve to turn it off with and allow it to do its job through the growing season. So again, this info is sort of critical in some of those rainwater harvesting structures that you might have in mind. Same with swales, right? You'd want, ideally, swales or rain gardens, you want to have them drain within a 24-hour period. And let's see here, this example, we've got those three, we've sort of summarized all that information here. And it's really interesting looking at this percolation because you can see it varies quite a bit. So test number 2 is half the percolation of test number 1, even though this is still quite sharp draining. And you can sort of see why that's happening when we have a little bit more clay here. Now, you might find, especially in an urban site, depending on where you're taking your test holes from, that you have a very sandy soil, but your percolation rate is super slow, and it may be a bit of a head scratching moment. But what you might find is that compaction is the cause of it, not the soil structure itself. So, or the soil texture, sorry. So that's also giving you really good information. And more often than not, urban sites are compacted at some level just due to the sheer, upheaval the whole site had during the construction of the house. And even if it's an older house, that may still persist. So there are strategies to break that up, and we can certainly talk about those. Let's see here. So that was our summary, and then we're looking at resources on how to build soil. So this is a very interesting little summary to go through, see what you have available. And again, the more variety you have for potential composting, the better. You're going to get a more varied, it's much like a diet. The more variety you can add into a compost, the more diverse the organisms are going to be. And some of the goals here. And then a little bit of summary. That's a beautiful image of a hugelkultur bed, which is one of those soil building strategies. And they're quite fun. I've done a couple of those. And then a conclusion or SWOT. And I think this is a SWOT analysis. Yeah. And then you have a chance to add some questions at the end. So it's, compared to last lesson, this is a lot easier. Now, one thing I did not take a look at was anybody put any questions for today on the Q&A document. Let's take a look at that. Looks like Jennifer has a question. All right, so extremely wet spring. Yes, we have had the same. Just had an atmospheric river, flooding. So because of the flooding, there was Well, that could have caused that slow percolation. Yeah. Yeah, I would, I would say that doing a percolation test, you're going to have slightly different results based on the time of year. So if you did it in the middle of the winter, yeah, it'll inherently be more saturated, so it would be slower. But you're going to get, you could almost average this. So I would say right after a flood event, it would be best to wait slightly on that. I would also say, if this is in an urban setting, that the effect of the flooding event may be minor, depending on how that impacted the project site. So if the project site was flooded, then yes, you do not want to, if you were to try and conduct this test, a percolation test, then it would not give you an accurate reading. But we've done such a good job of draining urban environments that even an atmospheric river, as I'm sure many of you know, once the rain starts hitting these impervious surfaces, it's literally jettisoned out of the project site. So that may really not have a huge effect. So I would say that testing for compaction would be a really good idea. And there's a couple ways you can do that. I'll show you what I use. I bought a Penetrometer because we use this on all our sites. It looks like this here. It's a very simple instrument. They're fairly easy to get in the US, quite hard to get in Canada. It's just crazy. However, I found one and I'm happy about that. But very simple apparatus. Typically you have two different tips that you put on the very end of this device, and you just literally push it down straight into the soil. And then you're getting, this meter here is giving you a sense of resistance. So if it just glides into the soil easily and you're typically under 150 PSI, then you're all good. You have no compaction issues there to worry about. If you push it in and it goes to yellow or red right away, then you do have some challenges, and you will want to consider how it's best to rectify that. Depending on the site size, would depend on how you would go about that. So in an urban setting, often the best approach is a broad fork, another tool that we have that's excellent. Here's probably one of the best for our areas, made by Meadow Creature. And the beauty of this is you can you can decompact down to 14 inches below the surface without significantly disturbing the surface. So it's great to do. You can do it on lawn areas. We use this probably 2 or 3 years on our annual vegetables, and now we just don't have to. It's every time we test it, we're good. So those are two items that you may want to consider. If you're on acreage, one of the best items I've seen for that is a Keyline Plow. And they're not very common, we're really lucky we have one on Vancouver Island, which is where I live. And it's the same premise as a broad fork. You can decompact the subsurface of an area, such as the one in the picture here, where it's pasture. without significant disturbance on the surface. In a farm setting like this, it may take several applications to do. It's a very interesting tool in that it slices through the, let's see if I can get a video here. I have a video, but I don't want to try and load it while I'm doing this. There's a lot of really good info on this, and probably one of the best resources for Keyline information right now is Darren Doherty. He teaches an amazing course called the REX or the Regrarian Platform. And I've been taking that for a couple of years, actually. It's pretty amazing. So it's larger scale design for farms. But you can see the results that, here, we'll just see if this, no, don't know why that's not working. Well, we'll go back to images. It's quite an amazing tool, and highly recommend it for large spaces. It also ties into another form of design called keyline design, and that is where we're trying to move water on a larger site from areas where there's moisture, which is predominantly a valley, to a ridge, which is predominantly drier. And Keyline Plow with the right pattern can help do that. So it is quite amazing. And yeah, I could talk all day about those, so we won't do that. Let's see here.
Can I add, I did on my tests, the area that I had used a broad fork in to get rid of blackberries and stuff, that's the area that drained really quickly compared to the other areas. So
there
yeah,
you go.
makes a lot of sense.
So that tells you a lot, doesn't it? Hey?
Yeah, I was just worried about the groundwater being so high because we're at such low elevation during the percolation test. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So
yeah, and I can't remember your site, Jennifer, but is it an urban location? Like I believe you
yeah,
said
I'm in
that.
Portland. So
Yeah. So all of the infrastructure around you is, very much a drying, so to get groundwater coming up in an urban site, having it come up quite high, that's quite rare, but not impossible by any means. I don't know if you actually got flooded. Did you? No. No. Well, that's lucky. That's not something you want to go through, that's for sure. So yeah, I think you find if you were to broad fork, those areas that were slow draining, you'd have a different result. And it's a lot of work. I mean, we've had to do lawn areas for some of our clients, and it takes some time. And you have to be careful, especially if you have irrigation, in-ground irrigation that you could hit. But it is very, very effective, and certainly worth doing, because if you don't, one little tidbit of information is that the top 8 inches of soil will typically have an air exchange, a complete air exchange once an hour. But amazing amount of exchange going between the atmosphere and the soils. So you can imagine if that is compacted and inhibited, it just cannot function in the same manner. So part of that is water holding capacity. Part of that's going to be and tie into is the amount of soil life that can live there. And that is really what I've, discovered in my career, is that we really want to cultivate soil, not plants. So if you can get your soils working and you put in appropriate material, it's appropriate for the setting, you're going to have great results. And if you're trying to rush something, let's say you wanted to plant a small garden in those 3 areas that had compaction, well, you're going to see, the response, and it won't be great. Unless you're planting things that love compacted areas, which of course is some of the weeds we get. So if you're out in an area that looks compacted and you have thistle, fennel is another one, very deep-rooted plants. Those are dandelion. Those are indicators you've got some compaction going on. Even morning glory is the same thing, or bindweed. It likes compaction. It also likes to have, it obviously wants to dominate the whole area. So the less plants that are growing there, the easier it is for it. Yeah, did that answer your question, Jennifer? Or do you have anything you want to add to that?
No,
No?
I think that answers that. Thank you so much.
Cool. Right on. Yeah, there's no other questions there. Did you have anything you wanted to ask me about? We've pretty much covered lesson 6. Actually, what I can do while you're thinking about that, let me see if I can find my Keyline Plow video, because I had a really interesting project a number of years ago where where we had a client on 5 acres, and we were called in after they had logged the area. We pretty much logged all the trees off except a few cedars, which is pretty much spelling doom for those. They like to be in amongst other trees, and they were all isolated. And what happened was this fellow had a company with a lot of machinery, and he bulldozed the area after it was logged, removed all those stumps, and we went in with our penetrometer and we got down a 1/4 inch, and boom, we're at 300 psi. It was I've never seen anything like it. So you obviously don't want to broad fork 5 acres. That would be pretty extreme. But we ended up bringing a Keyline Plow in there, and I have a video of it. And I'm just trying to. Actually, what I will do, I will go to my YouTube channel. It's on there. Just a short video. Get it up here, and we can all right. So we will.
Revolutionize the way you cut brush, hedges, or trim grapevines in your vineyard.
So there's the plow itself, and this is the area that was logged. So you can see when they cleared the area, they buried quite a bit of woody debris, which was not ideal. And rocks. And that's a little bit about that. But a great machine. Can't say enough about that. I don't know what else you would do. Well, a subsoiler would be, I guess, similar. And there's no doubt you could argue that the bottom of the, we go back to that, if the bottom of the plow, the very base of the plow where it strikes underground, that's going to compact. So you're going to have a little band of compaction below the plow blade, but everything else is getting decompacted. And here we're going for the maximum depth, which is about 14 or 16 inches, I think. And it worked pretty well. It's very non-traditional. We wouldn't usually do this around a whole bunch of trees, but you can see the suffering on the cedars here, and then all the weed response. Yeah, there was a little bit of cleanup afterwards on that. Yeah, so that's a little bit about compaction and soils, Jennifer. Did you have, you got me here for 10 or 15 minutes. I don't know if you have any questions you want to throw at me, or?
No, I've done the middle of the assignment, so I have to do the other two ends. I was going to probably do those today, but
Right on. Okay. All righty. Well, that's fantastic. I hope this has been helpful for you, and really appreciate you making time. Nobody showed up last week, I guess, because it was
it was Memorial Day.
holiday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll
So
wear it with the family, but
yeah. Well, you got to take your holidays when you can get them. That's for sure. But okay. Well, I will let you go and get on with your day. And thanks again for chiming in. And if you have any issues with your assignment, any challenges, just drop me a note. I'm happy to help you out. But I look forward to seeing it next Monday.
yeah, great. Thank you so very much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Well, you take care and have yourself a great week.
You too. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.